Hi everyone, this is Dr. Kingston, and in this video we'll be going over some brain basics. In this video, I'm going to give you a very basic introduction to the brain with a focus on the gross features that we're able to observe without additional histological preparation. We'll start off with the cortex areas, and then we will work our way into the deeper parts of the brain. So cortex simply means the outer surface of something. And in the brain, this is where the majority of gray matter is located. So the gray matter in both of these cortex areas here has this very characteristic fold to it, but the folds are very distinct in each region as well. We are going to start off talking about the larger of the two of these cortex areas, the cerebrum. This one is involved more in decision-making. And then we'll move down to the cerebellum, which is the smaller cortex area that sits posteriorly and inferiorly and is more involved with reflexes and unconscious bodily functions. The cerebrum is not only the larger of the two cortex areas, it's actually the largest portion of the brain overall. It's separated into right and left hemispheres by a midline longitudinal fissure that spans its entire length. So you can see it starting from the anterior part and working all the way back. Now, you can only make it out just a teeny little bit in this image, but this fissure is actually very deep, and it separates these two hemispheres almost completely. The only thing that's really connecting them is the floor of this fissure is a structure called the corpus callosum that is going to connect the right and left halves of the cerebrum. So the surface of the cerebrum folds into these very characteristic gyri or peaks and then sulci or valleys. So that would be a gyrus or a sulcus if we're just talking about one of them. And these folds are really a space-saving feature. Gray matter itself is formed by the cell bodies of neurons sitting together, which in cortex areas, these are arranged into a flat sheet. The more neurons there are, the more area that sheet needs to hold them. So by folding it up neatly like this, more neurons are able to fit in the limited size of your skull. There are some additional areas of gray matter deep in the brain, and these are arranged a little bit differently, so more compactly, and we refer to those simply as nuclei. The right and left hemispheres can be further divided into 4 lobes. These are named for the bones that they sit in closest approximation to, but their boundaries don't correspond precisely to those bones. So for our purposes in this course, we ask that you know the general position of each of these lobes. So we've got the frontal lobe front, the temporal lobe sitting inferiorly and lateral to that. The parietal lobe sits superiorly and laterally. And then the occipital lobe is located posteriorly and inferiorly. The cerebellum then is our smaller cortex area, and it sits inferior to the occipital lobe of the cerebrum and directly posterior to the brainstem, which you can just sort of make out in this image here. Like the cerebrum, it is located into 2 hemispheres, but instead of being separated by a fissure, these are connected side to side by a midline vermis. Deep to these cortex areas, we find the diencephalon and the brainstem. So in this view, you can see the cerebral cortex clearly here, and then deep to that, the corpus callosum at the bottom of the longitudinal fissure, and this is that structure that connects the right hemisphere to the left. And it's deep to that then that we find the diencephalon. The diencephalon is a very important relay and processing center for the brain, and it gets further divided up into a number of regions, including the thalamus, the epithalamus, the subthalamus, and the hypothalamus, with its associated little pituitary gland. The brainstem continues posteriorly and inferiorly from the diencephalon. The first portion here is the midbrain, and it's just this narrow little area here. It's about the breadth of your thumb. And that is contiguous both with the diencephalon up here and with the pons inferiorly. So the pons is this bulbous structure here. I always think it looks a little bit like the brainstem's beer belly, but that's neither here or there. And then inferior to that is the medulla oblongata, and the medulla here is contiguous with the spinal cord inferiorly. I mentioned the hypophysis or the pituitary gland really briefly in conjunction with the hypothalamus and diencephalon before, but it's worth spending just a little bit more time on this guy. The pituitary is an endocrine gland that is connected up to the hypothalamus, which was a relay center and processing center, by a little stalk or infundibulum that's made up of both neurons and vasculature. Now, the fun thing about endocrine glands is that they use the circulatory system to communicate. I like to think of them as creating hormones, like little messages in a bottle, and then dumping them into the bloodstream to get picked up by a different beach. So having both this neural connection and a vascular connection to the hypothalamus means that the pituitary and hypothalamus can speak to each other both through neural impulses and hormones. The hypophysis itself acts as a kind of master endocrine gland for the body. That means that most of its job is telling other endocrine glands what to do, so what hormones to produce, etc. This all makes it a very important gland, and it is very well protected within the skull. So it sits in its own little hypophyseal fossa, which is right here. You can see there. You can see it covered with dura in this image as well. And the place where it sits is called the hypophyseal fossa, and that is part of a larger structure of the sphenoid bone called the sella turcica, or the Turkish saddle. So if you look closely here, you can see how this bit of the sphenoid rises up, has a little saddle part here, and then goes back down, making it look like a saddle, whether that's Turkish or not. That is going to bring us to the end of the material here and into our review question. So for this review question, it is an identification question, and I want you to identify the region indicated by the arrow. All right, the correct answer here is A, the diencephalon. And we can tell this is the diencephalon by identifying other structures around it. So here we've got the cerebral cortex, and just deep to that is the corpus callosum. Immediately deep to that then is going to be the diencephalon, sitting superior to the midbrain and pons. We can identify this as being part of the deeper brain and not part of a cortex area, because we know these cortex areas have gyri or hills and sulci or valley between them. This is a very smooth shape on the internal aspect of the brain. All right, that is going to bring us to the end here, and I would like to thank you for joining me, and I will be seeing you soon. Thank you.